Today, property signed to the 29th of June 2021. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to this post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. In today's show, we look at the new pressures on renters, how banks have offered help to borrowers in the current lockdown, and the fallout from the intergenerational report, plus the latest government rorts and Facebook's surge. According to Domain, there is a need for eviction protections for renters amid Sydney's lockdown. Sydney tenants are at risk of falling behind on their rent amid the city's latest lockdown, with renters groups particularly concerned for how income losses will affect those already trying to pay off deferred rent from last year. Swift financial support and protections will be needed to help tenants through Sydney's second citywide lockdown, with renters now more vulnerable than they were last year, and many casual workers already burnt through savings to get through 2020. Thousands of renters have already sought advice on the Tenants Union of New South Wales website since Greater Sydney, the Central Coast, Blue Mountains and Wollongong went into lockdown on Saturday, said Chief Executive Officer Leo Patterson-Ross, with renters more likely to be in casual employment in hard-hit industries such as hospitality and tourism. While initial queries have resolved around inspections and access to properties during the lockdown, calls for help from those facing financial difficulties are expected to follow in the weeks to come, particularly if the lockdown is extended beyond 2 weeks. Hundreds of thousands of renters had less than $500 in savings before the pandemic. They couldn't come up with money in an emergency, and that hasn't changed. If anything, it's got worse, Mr. Patterson-Ross said, adding some tenants now had deferred rental debts to pay off on top of their weekly rent. The federal government's disaster payment of up to $500 for those who've lost more than 20 hours of work a week, which kicks in later this week, would not be enough to cover rent and living expenses, Patterson-Ross said. You can't claim it for a week, so that's already a lot of lost income. We do need to be talking about what impact this is going to have on people's wages and income and their ability to pay rent, he said. We want to see people protected from evictions, but also that financial support, payments ensuring either rent is covered or reduced, and support for landlords to reduce mortgage payments if needed. Some tenants are still protected under a 6-month transition period from the eviction moratorium, which ended in March, but those now falling behind on rent for the first time or who had paid off previous deferrals would have to rely on regular tenancy laws, Patterson-Ross said. There were no incentives in place either for landlords to enter into negotiations to reduce or defer rents, he added. The difference between March 2020 and now is we know a lot more about COVID, but that probably strengthens the case for saying people should not be getting evicted at the moment. The transmission is so easy, he said. And too little, too late, and too targeted is how Joel Digham, Executive Director of advocacy group Better Renting, sums up the disaster payment. He fears that without JobKeeper and the increased job seeker payment, which both did much of the heavy lifting last year, tenants will be more exposed to income losses, particularly those affected in the previous lockdowns. Any buffer that existed last year will be less now. People have already accessed their superannuation, maybe sold possessions if they need to. People have less savings, less of a buffer, and more need of rapid support. I noted tenants who had leases end or terminated during the lockdown window would find it more difficult to find a property with inspections limited to one-to-one appointments, let alone somewhere they could afford if they had lost work. It comes as Sydney tenants face record high house rents and more competition, with Sydney's vacancy rate now back to pre-pandemic levels, dropping to 2.7% last month. While the disaster payment was not perfect, it was better than nothing, an example of how measures could become automatically available during a lockdown, Mr. Digham said, adding, A similar approach should be taken to protection preventing tenants from being evicted in the lockdown. Hardship provisions were another measure the industry needed to look at, Mr. Patterson-Ross said. One of the lessons we learned from last year was that unlike many other essential services, housing providers don't have to have a hardship plan. It's one of the things we'll be pushing for as a general reform. But for now, as it did last year, tenants are likely to push back other expenses to keep paying their rent or lean on family or payday lenders, which can cause them financial difficulty down the line, or move out because they simply can't afford to stay where they are, he said. McGrath's head of network property management, Michael Colony, said it was too early to say if there would be a spike in tenants seeking rent reductions or deferrals as a result of the latest lockdown. However, he expected the calls for help would come rolling in if the stay-at-home orders extended beyond 2 weeks. What's a little bit worrying this time is we don't have JobKeeper, he said. Calls for rental help had tapered off at the start of the year, and most McGrath tenants had repaid any deferred rent in the months since, he said. He advised any tenants facing financial difficulty during lockdown to engage in early conversations with their property manager, and noted teams were equipped to have conversations with those suffering financially. Now, this, of course, is extremely worrying and is consistent with the rising rental stress that we saw in last month's household surveys, and I can tell you that already we're seeing a further spike, which I'll be reporting in a couple of weeks. But several lenders, including all 4 major banks, have offered loan relief to Sydney-siders impacted by the 2-week lockdown. Of course, on Saturday, the 26th of June, the New South Wales government announced that everyone who's been in Greater Sydney for any reason since Monday the 21st of June 21, including the Blue Mountains, Central Coast, Wollongong and Shell Harbour, would need to enter a 14-day lockdown period. The stay-at-home rules requires everyone who lives, works or educated or visited Greater Sydney. Given the 2-week shutdown, Prime Minister Scott Morrison has confirmed the Commonwealth Disaster Recovery Payment of up to $500 per week will be made available to those impacted by the lockdowns both in Sydney and Melbourne. There are more details, of course, to come on that. Lenders have also begun offering relief measures to borrowers to help ease the burden during lockdown. At ANZ, small business and home loan customers of ANZ affected by the latest COVID-19 lockdown in New South Wales will be able to access measures such as short-term payment relief, including on asset finance and business loans, waived fees, restructuring home loan debt, or switching to a fixed-rate loan, and a refund on merchant terminal fees. Mark Hand, the ANZ Group Executive Australia Retail and Commercial, said, "We know this lockdown will have a big impact on our customers in and around Sydney. Like the lockdowns we've seen in the other states, we know that it can be some time before the real effects are felt by families and businesses. We want our customers to know that there is help available if they need it in this difficult time. Our teams are standing ready to assist and will work with customers to understand their specific needs and help tailor individual solutions." At CBA, they've enabled access to a raft of support and assistance measures. For business customers, these include repayment deferrals on asset finance and eligible business loans, refunds of merchant terminal fees for up to 90 days for eligible customers, waivers on fees and notice periods on cash deposit and file management deposit accounts, and tailored support for larger business customers. And for retail customers, the support includes accessing money in redraw or everyday offset on eligible loans, restructuring home loan debt, switching to a fixed-rate home loan, reducing repayments to the minimum monthly repayment amount, and also CBA has introduced a freeze on forced sales until September 2021 this year for eligible customers impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic who are struggling with repayments. CBA's CEO said, "We want to assure any of our customers who need assistance during this difficult time that we have measures in place to support them, including short-term repayment deferrals. Our teams are here to help them and can tailor solutions to suit their different circumstances." We know this lockdown will have an impact on the Sydney-based business community, and we've been speaking to our customers to understand if they need assistance. Our business customers have demonstrated great resilience throughout the pandemic, and we're committed to doing what we can to help them through this lockdown period and beyond. And he continued, we've been able to provide a lot of support for our New South Wales customers over the past year and a half through COVID, and we're here to help anyone who needs support during this latest difficult time. We'd encourage anyone who banks with us and are facing difficulties to get in touch with us. This is a time for us to come together again and support our customers. At NAB, they said they will be helping impacted business customers by offering restructured business facilities, along with reduced or waived application fees, deferred principal payments across multiple product options, waived costs and charges for withdrawing term deposits early, giving customers quick access to cash flow, and relief on credit card and personal loans and professional wellbeing support. Meanwhile, support for individual customers include providing a temporary reduced payment arrangement, giving a temporary payment break, restructuring a home loan or consolidating debts where appropriate, and well-being and financial counselling support. NAB Group Executive for Business and Private Bank Andrew Irving said, Australians have shown how resilient they are right now through this pandemic, and together we will continue to get through this. Our bankers will work with customers to understand their individual situation, the pressures they're under, and how we can then tailor support specifically for them. Our bankers are experienced and well versed with helping step customers through things and are able to put in place solutions to help. And Westpac, as well as supporting Sydney-siders, they said will support to those customers in the Northern Territory that are also impacted by restrictions. Support measures for both impacted areas, they include for business customers, case management support for small business customers experiencing financial difficulty, reduced or deferred repayments on assets and equipment finance, and eligible business loan restructuring with no fees incurred, referrals to financial counsellors or other support services. And for retail customers, the bank is offering credit card repayment and interest rate reductions for a period of time, home or personal loan repayment deferrals or reductions, interest rate reductions and loan term extensions, fee waivers across a range of products and restructuring of debt, referrals to financial counsellors or other support services. Chris de Bruyn, Westpac's Chief Executive Consumer and Business Banking, said, we want our customers to know we are here to support them through this period. Westpac offers a range of options tailored to suit the customer's individual circumstances, including reduced or deferred repayments and low interest rate loans. We have specialist support teams ready to assist customers, and we're here to help them get back on their feet, he said. Now, the point I want to make here is that if you are in difficulty, you must talk to your bank and talk to your bank early. And it's not just the big four who are providing support, others are too. But of course, it's also in their interests, because if they're able to negotiate the restructuring or otherwise defer payments, then their loans will not go into default. And that, of course, would have a capital impact on the bank. So it's rather self-serving as well as supporting individuals. So the bottom line is this. If you are in financial flow difficulty, and a lot of people are, it is worth talking to your lender, but also be cautious about restructuring and refinancing, because in some cases you could be worse off. Now, over in Western Australia, more than 22,000 new housing loans to first home buyers were approved in the 10 months between July 2020 and April 21, according to new research. That's nearly double the same period the year before. It's a new report from the Bankwest Curtin Economic Centre that's assessed housing affordability in Western Australia against New South Wales and Queensland. The research found more Western Australian residents were ranking their housing as affordable, despite Perth now ranking third amongst state capitals for annual growth in the price of established houses, behind Hobart up 6.6% and Sydney at 5.3%. WA housing loans also reached a historic peak in February this year, with around $2.4 billion in loans allocated to the housing sector. That's twice the value of the previous year. Housing loans to investors reached $452 million in April, and that's the highest loan commitments to investors in WA since 2015. But local first home buyers have been the big winners, following on from the government's targeted stimulus. According to the report co-author and director of the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute, Curtin University Centre, Stephen Rowley. WA first home buyers also took a larger slice of new loan commitments in comparison to New South Wales and Queensland, at over 40% for much of the last 10 years. And Mr. Rowley noted rookie buyers had also received a greater share of new home loans than non-first home buyers in each month from August 2020 to January 21. For the first time since 2009, almost half of those who purchased in the last 6 months said government incentives allowed them to bring forward their decision to purchase, and 43% of those purchasing in the last 2 years stated they would not have been able to buy without the incentives, Mr. Rowley said. Such incentives, which includes grants and stamp duty relief, could see first home buyers in WA access almost $70,000 in total to buy their first home. There had also been 16,391 new build home builder applications in WA, compared to 16,266 in New South Wales and 21,871 in Queensland, as well as a further 22,671 WA building bonus applications. The main barrier to home ownership for 70% of potential purchases was the deposit. Perth's residential property price index has risen by 9.6% to 109.2 between December 2019 and March 2021, but of course just recall that prices has been falling before that since 2011. But 53% of WA respondents regarded their house as affordable, rising from 39% in 2015. 2/5 of people in WA renting or owning with a mortgage were paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs. That's dropped by 5% from 2019 and 8% lower than 2015. And there's also been a decline in the proportion of households having difficulty meeting housing costs, with the proportion frequently struggling falling from 24% in 2015 to 11% in 2021. Amity James, report co-author and deputy director of the Australian Housing and Research Institute's Curtin University Centre, noted the increase in low and moderate income households regarding their housing as affordable was partly driven by lower mortgage rates. There's also been big improvements as to how housing costs affect various life domains, such as mental and physical health, social life and spending on children, Dr. James said, but a number of households remain vulnerable and or have not seen affordability improvements. The report stated 40% of respondents were finding high housing costs affecting their mental health. Private renters had the most difficulty meeting housing costs, with 34% regularly struggling, compared to 26% of those with a mortgage. Report co-author and Bankwest Curtin Economics Centre Director Alan Duncan commented the divide between owner-occupiers and renters is likely to increase in the coming months as pressure continues on the already tight rental market. Rents in WA have increased by $60 a week on average since September 2020 because of high rental demand and limited supply of houses available to rent, and are likely to increase further now that the moratorium has lifted, he said. If rents were to increase by 10%, this would have a major impact on the financial well-being of more than 100,000 renters in WA, disproportionately affecting those receiving rent assistance. 1 in 5 one-parent family households rated their housing as unaffordable, with 40% paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs. But Mr. Rowley expects increased housing stock will eventually ease rental price pressures. He noted a 118% surge in the number of dwelling approvals in WA over the year to April. Based on first home buyers applying for home builder and the building bonus scheme alone, that could be around 10,000 households leaving the private rental market over the next 6 to 12 months, which will ease pressure on the rental market but provides little relief to those currently searching for accommodation or dealing with rent increases, he said. Elsewhere, the Grattan Institute says that the intergenerational reports are former Treasurer Peter Costello's fiscal future-proofing scheme, a 5-yearly reminder that without action, an ageing population and other changes will leave public finances looking ugly. The fallout from COVID means Monday's 2021 report projects a bigger sea of red ink than the previous 2015 report. Is a useful reminder that lifting productivity, reforming age-based tax breaks, improving migration and confronting climate change are crucial to leaving a happier legacy for the next generation. Budget deficits for 40 years, with net debt still at 34.4% of GDP in 2061, and the interest costs of serving that debt growing to 1.7% of GDP, is what they predict. It's what happens when ageing populations hit up against highly age-skewed spending and tax policies, they said. The 40-year budget projections look nasty, but the reality is almost certainly worse because the intergenerational report is too rosy on critical assumptions. First, the report assumes productivity will grow at 1.5% per year over the next 40 years, in line with the 30-year average. That's highly optimistic. Productivity did indeed go gangbusters in the 1990s, growing at 2.2% per year. But in the 20 years since then, growth has been more sluggish at 1.2% and under 1% for the past 5 years. The same is true of other advanced economies. Structural shifts, including slowing technological change, the rise of less productive service sectors, a reduction in job switching, and increases in market concentrations are slowing productivity growth almost everywhere. Many of these headwinds are here to stay, which means an awful lot would need to go right to boost productivity in coming decades, including the unleashing of a new era of technological transformation. Another big source of misplaced optimism is failure to quantify the impacts of climate change. It simply makes no sense to project fiscal outcomes over 40 years without an attempt to factor in the high and growing costs of a warming planet. It found that more severe natural disasters, sea level rises, heat waves and declining agricultural production would reduce incomes in New South Wales by $8.3 billion a year in 2061 under a high warming scenario compared to a low warming one. Treasurer Frydenberg said on Monday that the role of the intergenerational report was to deliver, quote, sobering news. Well, that's half of their role, but they should also galvanise policy action. There are many choices governments can make to put the nation on a better path. First, they should do what is within their control to boost productivity. This means working through the many positive suggestions from national and state productivity commissions, the Grattan Institute and others to revitalise our health and education systems, improve our tax system, fix planning regimes and make more sensible infrastructure choices. Second, government should lower barriers to workforce participation for women and older Australians by making childcare more affordable, improving paid parental leave and revisiting the pension access age and superannuation preservation age. Third, it should wind back the policies that supercharge the effects of the ageing population on government finances. Tax-free superannuation income on retirement, refundable franking credits and special tax offsets for seniors mean we now ask wealthy older Australians to contribute a lot less than we did. We tax seniors too lightly. An older household earning $100,000 a year pays on average less than half the total tax of a working-age household earning the same amount. The intergenerational report makes clear that this is not sustainable, and yet successive governments have been reluctant to shift the dial. Fourth, the Grattan Institute says we should embrace the benefits of migration, reorienting our skilled migration program to focus on long-term economic potential, especially by giving priority to younger, more skilled workers, would mean supporting the ageing population and generating a substantial fiscal dividend, helping defray some of the costs of population ageing. And finally, we've got to fill the federal policy vacuum on climate change. In the absence of national leadership, state governments, businesses and others have stepped up with costly second, third and fourth best schemes. For example, the New South Wales Government's intergenerational report identifies fixing the slow and disorderly energy transition as a single thing it can do to improve its long-term financial position and the state's economy. That is entirely understandable, but intergenerational reports have been warning of the impacts of the ageing population for almost 20 years. Failing to act on the obvious to-do list would be a dereliction of duty to future generations. Let's hope the next 5-yearly check-in shows us on a better path, but I have to say there is very little evidence of any change of trajectory from anybody at this stage in the game. The Auditor General has blasted another federal government grant program criticising a car park construction fund that heavily favoured coalition-held seats and ignored the areas of most need. It's been revealed that more than half of the grants were chosen the day before the government hit caretaker mode in the 2019 election, and more than 3/4 of the projects were mooted for coalition-held seats. Labels already branded the latest scandal car park rorts, with the Auditor General finding that 10 projects under the Commuter Car Park Fund weren't even attached to train stations. So the opposition is demanding Prime Minister Scott Morrison explain the programme and that Minister Alan Tudge resign, claiming it's a sport rorts on steroids. The department's approach to identifying and selecting commuter car park projects for funding commitment was not appropriate. It was not designed to be open or transparent, the Australian National Audit Office said in its scathing report. Sitting inside the $4.8 billion Urban Congestion Fund, the car parks program was meant to, according to the department's website, encourage greater use of public transport. As of March 2021, the government had announced 44 projects across 47 sites, but the report ruled that 0% of those projects had actually been proposed by the department. Critical that the selection was limited to coverage and was not demonstrably merit-based, and that they appear to have been mostly chosen after either a written request from ministers or as election promises in the 2019 campaign. Beyond merely canvassing the ideas of local coalition MPs or candidates for certain seats, there was only limited engagement with some states and some councils, the report found. The Auditor General also noted that 64% of the projects were in Melbourne, despite the majority of the most congested roads in Australia being located in Sydney, and that most of the Melbourne projects were in the southeast of the city, not the more congested northwest. It also found that 77% of the projects were in coalition-held seats, with another 10% in seats held by Labor at the time, but won by the coalition at that election. Of the 47 projects, the most successful electorates were all Liberal held. 6 were in the seat of Goldstein, held by Liberal Tim Wilson, 5 in Deakin, held by Assistant Treasurer Michael Sukkar, 4 in Kooyong, covered by Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, and 4 were in Banks, where the Mental Health Minister David Coleman resides. The distribution of projects selected reflects the geographic and political profile of those given the opportunity by the government to identify candidates for funding consideration, the audit claimed. The department did not engage with state governments and councils, which increased the risks that selected projects would not deliver the desired outcomes at the expected cost to the Australian government. They noted that 27 of the 44 projects were officially selected by the government on April the 10th, 2019. That's the day before the government called an election and went into caretaker mode. 70% were announced during the 2019 federal election caretaker period, the report stated. In one particular 2018 set of events, the department had collated spreadsheets of projects at the request of the then Urban Infrastructure Minister Alan Tudge. The Minister's office advised that it would then go through the spreadsheets with the Prime Minister's office and the Deputy Prime Minister's office ahead of a related meeting between the Minister for Urban Infrastructure and the Prime Minister, the Auditor General wrote. Despite being a fund for commuter car parks at train stations, they found that 10 proposed sites were not attached to a rail station, which raised questions as to their eligibility. As of this year, just 2 of the 47 car parks have been finished, with another 3 under construction and only 12% of the total funding actually spent. But to me, this goes to form. And finally, Facebook on Monday vaulted itself into trillion-dollar territory as a late afternoon stock rally helped power the company past that milestone. Shares of Facebook gained 4.2% in Monday's session in New York after a federal judge opted to dismiss an antitrust case that the Federal Trade Commission had brought against the social media giant. The judge determined that the Federal Trade Commission did not provide enough facts to back up the argument that Facebook is a social networking monopoly, and that the FTC now has 30 days to file an amended version of the suit. Facebook and the other big tech companies all come under increased scrutiny from regulators, but the judge's determination on Monday indicates potentially steeper hurdles for regulatory bodies looking to clamp down on tech giants. Facebook closed the trading day with a market cap of over $1 trillion, becoming just the 5th US company to cross that valuation threshold. The company stands behind Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google's parent Alphabet. It's been a momentous past few days for big tech market cap milestones as Microsoft broke through the $2 trillion barrier last week. Facebook's market cap hit a 2020 low of just $416 billion last March, and the company has added more than $592 billion to its valuation since then. The market cap gains since Facebook's pandemic bottom are worth more than the entire market caps of Visa, Nvidia, and JP Morgan Chase & Co. Shares of Facebook have rallied 65% over the past 12 months, as the S&P 500 has risen just 43%. So you can see here that the tech sector is dominating performance in the stock markets. And that's likely to continue, I think, for some time, simply because they are so big and so able to generate monopoly profit. The regulators in the US are still relatively timid, and I don't expect to see much change there. But interestingly, in some other countries, the temperature is definitely rising. So it'll be interesting to watch whether these companies get more headwinds ahead in terms of their revenue growth. We'll see. Now, if you're buying your home in Sydney's contentious market, you don't need to stand alone. This is the time you need to have Edwin Almeida from Ribbon Property Consultants standing alongside you. Buying a property is both challenging and adversarial. The vendor has a professional on their side. Emotions run high, price discovery and price transparency are hard to find, and then there's the wasted time and financial investments that you make. Edwin understands your needs, so why not engage a licensed professional to stand alongside you? With RPC, you know you have experience, knowledge, and master negotiators looking after your best interests. So shoot Ribbon an email at info@ribbonproperty.com.au, and if you use the promo code DFAWTW/Martin, you can get a 10% discount offer. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.